Using Agentic AI introduces all sorts of new possibilities, most of all for just making your work much, much more efficient than it used to be and being a lot more productive than you were before. But it also raises quite a lot of new problems and problems that we're not that used to dealing with. But we know about them. So we know that from the early days about ChatGPT, there was this problem, they often call it hallucinations. I'm not a great fan of the word hallucinations because it kind of like, it implies that the AI knew something, but it just sort of like hallucinated. If I'm hallucinating and making stuff up, then everybody knows I'm hallucinating. I'm making up weird stuff. So I'm not hallucinating just now. I'm talking to you using my brain. But AIs don't have brains, and so they can't hallucinate. Well, there's a whole big rabbit hole of things, but hallucination isn't quite what happens with the AI. It's just it says wrong stuff. Now and again, whatever the AI you're working with, it can be Claude, ChatGPT, they can call it Opus or whatever it wants. Whatever you want, it can be called like the most incredible name you can think of. It's still going to get things wrong now and again. The outputs are going to be wrong. And that's something as a researcher you have to be aware of. And it's also, I feel like I have to give a warning now. There is no way of getting round that problem of it saying things wrong now and again. There is no way I can give you some sort of guarantee that I'll tell you the method and it will never get things wrong. If I could give that guarantee, I'd just build my own AI and like sell it to you instead of making these videos about how you use it. But it's just impossible. We can't expect these AIs not to get things wrong. They are going to get things wrong. So what do we do? Well, what we need to do is have a very critical mindset about how we use them. And what I'm going to do now is show you, with the example we've just gone through, how we might criticize it, prod it, poke it, and try to make sure that it's doing things right to the best of our ability. Now, really, you should be a cancer researcher if you're going to write a paper about cancer. Actually, not just really. You should be a cancer researcher if you're going to write a paper about cancer. And you should be able to critically assess the types of outputs you're getting. But even if you are a cancer researcher, you need to be able to go through the process of really checking that it's understood what, or maybe it's not really understood anything. It's repeating things back to you which you feel comfortable of sharing with other people that you really believe are correct. And you're central to that process. And I'm going to give you some examples of the types of prods and pokes that I give to Claude or to other agentic AI just to make sure that it's saying the correct thing. So here is the prompt that I start with. This is just following on from the things I did here. I made a caption for the figure, but I'm just continuing the story that we already looked at. And I say, well, now I want you to think critically about the methods we've used. First, read through the code and check it's correct. Please add comments to show how it works. So this is important if we're going to send it on to someone else, that we've added comments, just like usual. Claude is pretty good at putting in comments, but we've given it some background information that we'd like to add to the comments for the code. And so let's go through and do that. And it, of course, starts to do that. And it immediately found a couple of problems. And I was thinking a little bit about this when I did this. We do 5 statistical tests. We could actually do even more if we were going to compare all of these 4 different treatments. But we did 5 statistical tests. And when you do 5 statistical tests, you have to adjust the p-values that you're using for significance. I can get an old debate about p-values, but let's say we accept p-values. You have to adjust the p-values that you think are significant. And the standard way of doing it when you're doing multiple comparisons is use the Bonferroni correction. And so it suggests that we should use the Bonferroni correction. It also had some suggestions about like variable names. It had added T as the end of the study. And so it just like wants to give better variable names as well. Very nice, good practice. So it's made a new version of the code, which is sitting here. And you can see the changes it's made are marked in green. It's explaining a little bit more of the background to those things. It's explaining what the different parameters in the model work. It's just being more thorough in its approach to this data. And yeah, it's mainly put in comments into the code to make it correct. But I think it should also have added the Bonferroni correction. Yeah, so here it's added the Bonferroni correction to change for the p-values. It is hard-coded actually, but it's made sure that that's correct and added that. Now you can, of course, go through this code in detail and check that it's correct. There is, of course, a little bit of a problem there that you're probably a cancer researcher if you're doing this, and you won't necessarily be able to check if code is correct better than Claude can. But it's all there in order to be verifiable. And of course, one of the important things is that this should be uploaded with any supplementary material you do so that other people can check that you have, or you with help of Claude, have done this analysis correctly. In the end, it is always you that stands for the analyses that have done. You can't just say, oh, I did it in Claude. You have to stand for those final analyses. So that's the updated code. It says it runs correctly. It's fixed a few bugs. Then the main thing I would say from my perspective is it's added this Bonferroni correction, which I think is the incorrect thing to do in a statistical test like this. And now it's the point where we don't just take Claude's word for it. So let's push it even more. So we've told it to be critical about what we've done. I want it to actually explain to me, and this is where thinking about the example where I'm a cancer researcher, I might not have encountered the log rank test before. What I can do is I can say, well, explain the log rank test to me. And now we're using, I said at the start, this generative and agentic AI. We're sort of going back to the generative AI part of it. We're not asking it to run anything. We're asking it how the log rank test works. And so the core idea, it explains the core idea here, that at each moment a death occurs, you ask, given how many mice were still alive in each group at this moment, how many deaths would we expect in each group under the null hypothesis? And the null hypothesis in this case is that the rate of the mice dying in both the treatment and the control is the same. And so you find out how many you would expect to die in each of the groups under this null hypothesis assumption, and then you test deviations from that null hypothesis assumption. So this is the statistics behind the log rank test, and this I can say is a pretty much correct and good description of how that test works. Definitely good for you to understand a little bit more about how that test works by looking at the answers. Now, it's good to check your sources. So what I did is I said, well, where can I actually read more about this test? And I found that they suggested this Bland and Altman article. Again, and I want to emphasize, this is good practice. This is not just something I'm doing for the video here. I downloaded the Bland and Altman article, the log rank test. I will show that to you now. And here it is. This is the original log rank test article. It's not the original article where it was developed. The test was developed by Cox, as many of these tests were. But this is a nice, standardly accepted article in BMG explaining how this test works. And you can look and compare this to the answer you got from Claude. You can see actually many of the same equations are there. And, Claude is using generative AI to reproduce this thing. So it's pretty much taking what's written in this article and reproducing it for you. And then it's cross-referenced that already with the methods that it's using. You can go back into the code and check them, but you've got now sort of like checking these things at different areas. Do these articles exist? Is the explanation working? Is the code in place which is doing those things? And you can go through several iterations actually with Claude, asking it to double check and triple check these types of alignments. What I then did is I found out one of the assumptions in the model is that the hazard ratio, the ratio at which the mice die, or the rate at which the mice die under the control divided by the one at in the treatment, well, it's assumed that that's constant over time for the data. And so I ask it, is there a way of telling if the hazard ratio is constant over time for the data? This, I would say, is a little bit of a trick question on my part because the sample size here is tiny. So I don't think there is any way or any statistical test which will tell you if the hazard rate is constant over time. It's just an impossible thing to do. You've got like 5 or 6 data points for each of these. You're trying to calculate a rate over them, and then you're trying to see if that rate changes. So you can see that you're already trying to estimate sort of 2 things from 6 data points. It's not going to work. So from a common sense point of view, this just isn't going to work. But it can make the plots, and now this is one of, I suppose, the risks here, is it will make the plots even though it sort of, even though it sort of shouldn't make the plots. It should just say what I've just said to you, is that this isn't really something that you can do. It does mention, it makes the plots, but it does mention there's too few points. And it does kind of say like, we've only got 2 points here. So it does warn you that you can't do it. But really, if I was asked to do this, I would say, look, I'm not going to do this for you. Then I ask it the following question. I say, well, is a single cross? So if we did have a cross in the hazard ratio, is that really going to help us? And it's sort of, again, it's coming up with like more and more different tests it could do, ways of analyzing this question. It's going into like lots of research about, how it can sort of help you out with this stuff. But really, it should just sort of shut this conversation down, because even in the data we have, you're just not going to know whether this is going to work or not. So that's a warning sign, I think. And that's a warning sign for people using this technology, that it doesn't kind of like tell you things directly. It just keeps going and doesn't really say, let's just stop thinking about that now. And so it's very easy to get sucked into more and more tests and more ideas here. And there's also another problem. And the problem is the one that goes back to this use of the word is commonly called hallucination. I would just call it getting things wrong. Because I asked here if I could find out more about, this log plot that it had come up with to do the test. Not because I thought it was useful, but because I just wanted to see where it's getting its information from. It's come up with a few different books that I can look in, which is very nice. But then I say, well, wait a minute. Is there an open source document I can find to look at this test? And it says, well, the starting point is Wikipedia. So there you can look at the proportional hazard models, explain the log plots correctly, and cites primary sources. Oh, that's good. And I followed its advice on the test itself, and it did find an article which I could download and look at. And here it says, well, there's not great articles on this, but like you can look on Wikipedia. And I looked on Wikipedia, and I had some bad news for it. Okay, I asked it another question first, but I'll come back to that other question. But while it was asking my next question, I read through the Wikipedia page on proportional hazards, and I found no reference to log plots, although the assumption was reported. So there was something about the assumption. And I give it the Wikipedia page, and the first thing it does is it reads through the Wikipedia page, and it agrees with me. So it's not like, this isn't going to affect the results that we get out of it, but it is a warning sign that as it gets out of its depth, it starts to report incorrect things back. And it's just lazy, really, I don't want to accuse it of being lazy, but it's just not got the information to tell me about this log plot with these hazard things. So what it does is it refers to the Wikipedia page, and then a check on that Wikipedia page says that I can't actually find that information. Another way you can push and challenge Claude or any agentic AI is by asking it to compare what it has done to what you're actually trying to get in the end. So what I asked it here is asked it for 2 or 3 papers from leading cancer research journals where we're really using a small sample size and see if they're using the same type of test. And it found 3 papers that it suggests here. And this was the one that caught my attention as DeMio from Cancer Cell from 2025. The method states that log rank tests were used for survival curves. So what I did is I went in and I downloaded the paper and I give the paper to Claude and I say, well, can you tell me which figure does the same thing that I've done? And it does a direct step-by-step comparison between figure 2D and DeMio and our data. And in this case, when I look in figure 2D in the original manuscript, which I've downloaded to check, it has a very similar plot without the error bars. It does the legends in a slightly different way, but very similar to the way that I've tested it. And that's exactly what Claude reports as an answer here. So they don't show the confidence interval for the Kaplan-Meier curves. And that is more typical actually for many of those papers. They don't show the confidence intervals. And it gives us a little bit more confidence that the thing that we've done is correct. In summary, for checking that Claude is as correct as possible, I can never give any guarantees about how correct it's going to be. I've done 3 different things. The first thing is I've asked it to check through the code and give comments on the code to find out, to see if there's any problems with that. Sometimes you can start a different agent session and that will allow you to sort of start afresh and get a fresh look at the code. But that's an important step, is you ask it to go through and check its workings. The second thing is I've asked it to explain to me the methods that it's used and how they've worked, how they relate to the analysis it's done. And then I've gone in and I've checked the original sources, both on Wikipedia, where I found that it was lacking, and in journal articles, which I found it confirmed the types of analysis it's done, and compare that to the analysis that Claude has done. And that's a very good way of finding things that might have gone wrong. The third approach is what I've just done, and that is to ask it to now find similar articles to the ones that I've worked on, published in respectable areas, go into those articles and check that they've used the types of methods that you've used and everything lines up with what you call like kind of the state of the art or the proper way of doing things in the scientific field that you're working in. If you do those 3 things, you're much more likely to get reliable results. And the last thing I'll re-emphasize for you is that you have ultimate responsibility for what you publish. You can't blame Claude that it came up with this thing or that thing. You have the ultimate responsibility for the end product of this process.